Let's jump right into this explainer and demystify the rules behind some real invisible treasures, intangible assets under IAS 38. We spend so much time analyzing things we can actually touch, like real estate or heavy machinery. But let's be real, some of the absolute most valuable assets a modern company owns are completely invisible. So today, we're going to break down the exact framework that dictates how we handle these hidden gems on the balance sheet.
Here's our roadmap for the breakdown. We'll be hitting defining the invisible, the active market test, research versus development, the pirate criteria, rules of amortization, and finally, indefinite useful life.
All right, starting with Section 1, defining the invisible. How do we even prove these things exist? So the crucial takeaway here is that just lacking physical substance, that isn't enough to magically make something an intangible asset in the accounting world. You might have an incredible company culture or a rock star management team, but you can't just slap a number on that and stick it on your balance sheet, right? It has to meet a very strict definition. It's got to be identifiable, non-monetary, and obviously lack physical substance. For an intangible to actually graduate to a recognized asset, it absolutely must check all three of these boxes. First, it has to be identifiable. That basically means it's separable, like you could sell it, transfer it, or rent it out totally independent from the rest of the business, or it arises from a specific legal or contractual right. Second, the entity has to have control over it. And third, it's got to be probable that future economic benefits are actually going to flow to the entity. If you miss even one of these, no asset for you. It stays completely off the books.
Moving on to Section 2, the active market test.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The valuation divide. Think about a standard tangible asset, like a mobile phone. You can easily use the revaluation model to find its fair value because, an active market exists. You can look up the going rate for that exact phone today. But then consider a unique brand name, something like Zomato. You can't just use the revaluation model and take a wild guess at its fair value because a brand name like that simply isn't traded daily on an open market. The rule here is incredibly strict. If there is no active market trading with sufficient volume and frequency, you literally cannot use the revaluation model for that specific intangible asset. And honestly, because every brand, every patent, or custom piece of software is totally unique, finding a true active market for intangibles is actually super rare.
All right, Section 3, research versus development, or as I like to call it, the innovation divide.
When a company is generating an asset internally, we have to split the timeline into two very distinct phases. During the research phase, you're just exploring, right? You're gaining new knowledge. Because the outcome is a total coin toss at this point, all the costs you incur hit your profit and loss statement immediately as an expense. But once you cross over into the development phase, you aren't just exploring anymore. You are actively applying that knowledge to a specific design or plan. And that is the phase that opens the door to capitalization, meaning you can finally start building an asset on your balance sheet.
But hold on, you can't just capitalize your development costs the second you decide you're developing something. You have to definitively unlock the requirements. So how exactly do we know when to flip the switch? That brings us to Section 4, the pirate criteria. I absolutely love this acronym because it perfectly lays out the exact map to the treasure. To capitalize development costs, your project has to meet the pirate criteria. P for probable future economic benefits. I for intention to complete the asset. R for having the resources to actually finish it. A for the ability to complete and then use or sell it. T for technical feasibility, meaning, it's actually possible to build the thing. And E, the expenditure during development can be measured reliably. The exact moment a project satisfies every single one of these conditions, you stop dumping those development costs into the P&L and you start capitalizing them as a shiny new intangible asset. This timeline elegantly shows that journey. Phase 1 is research. That's an immediate expense. Phase 2 is early development. But hey, if you haven't met all the pirate criteria yet, those costs still go straight to the P&L. It's only in Phase 3, late development, once the pirate criteria are fully unlocked, that every subsequent dollar you spend actually builds up your asset's recognized value. Okay, so you funded the project, you hit all the criteria, and you finally built the asset. What happens the moment development is complete? Well, the capitalization of costs immediately stops. You can't just keep padding the asset's value forever. A whole new phase begins. Which leads us into Section 5, rules of amortization. Here is a hard and fast rule you need to remember. You cannot start amortizing an intangible asset while it's still under development. The clock on amortization only starts ticking the exact moment the asset is officially available for its intended use, not a single day earlier.
The mechanics here are pretty straightforward. Just like depreciation for physical equipment, amortization systematically allocates the intangible asset's value over its life. You just take the fair value or the cost of the asset, divide it by its remaining useful life, and charge that amount to the P&L systematically. It basically just reflects the gradual consumption of the asset's economic benefits over time.
And finally, Section 6, Indefinite Useful Life. What happens when an asset lives forever?
There is a massive distinction in the accounting rules right here. If you have a finite life intangible, say a patent that expires in exactly 10 years, you amortize it systematically. But if an intangible asset has an indefinite useful life, you never amortize it. I mean, it wouldn't make any mathematical sense to divide its value by infinity, right? So instead of amortizing, you simply check if its value has dropped.
And that brings us to impairment testing under the standard IAS 36 rules. Because we aren't systematically lowering the value of these specific assets through amortization, the rules demand some pretty strict oversight. These three specific types of assets, goodwill, intangible assets that are still under development, and intangible assets with an indefinite useful life, they have to be tested for impairment every single year. You've got to do this annually, even if everything looks fantastic and there are absolutely no warning signs of a value drop.
Let's wrap up with an amazing quirk of group accounting. Remember our Zomato example from earlier? Zomato cannot put its own homegrown brand name on its balance sheet. Why? Because it was internally generated and there's no reliable cost that can be strictly measured just for the brand itself. But if a larger group, let's say Tata, comes in and acquires the motto, Tata is paying a hard, tangible purchase price. Because there's now a definitive cost attached to that transaction, the acquiring company absolutely will recognize that brand name on the consolidated balance sheet at its fair value. It is the exact same brand, but you get a totally different accounting outcome based entirely on how it was acquired. So the crucial takeaway from all this is that while intangible assets entirely lack physical substance, the framework for defining, valuing, and amortizing them is incredibly rigid and precise. Understanding the pirate criteria and those strict lines between research and development really allows us to see exactly where value is being created. It kind of leaves you wondering, as we analyze these big companies, what massive invisible treasures are hiding entirely off balance sheet today simply because they haven't crossed these strict accounting thresholds yet. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we keep decoding the numbers.